The leather binding cracked softly under my fingertips, releasing that familiar scent of aged paper and forgotten time that had become my only comfort in the 3 weeks since I'd arrived at the Cardinal estate. I sat cross-legged on the library floor, surrounded by centuries of knowledge that someone had actually bothered to preserve, unlike everything else in my life that had crumbled to dust. My back ached from hours in this position, but I didn't dare use the ornate chairs positioned strategically throughout the room. They weren't meant for staff. I'd learned that lesson my first day when one of the guards, a man with cold eyes named Emmanuel, had made it clear that my role here was temporary, replaceable, barely visible. The estate sprawled across what felt like miles of manicured grounds, hidden behind walls that suggested either extraordinary wealth or extraordinary paranoia. Probably both. I'd been hired through an anonymous agency posting that had asked surprisingly few questions about my qualifications as a book restorer, and far too many about my willingness to sign non-disclosure agreements. Desperation had made the choice simple. My father's gambling debts didn't care about my principles, and the collectors who'd started appearing at my small apartment didn't seem interested in payment plans. This job offered enough money to buy me time, maybe even freedom if I survived the isolation. The library itself was a masterpiece. 3 stories of dark wood and brass fixtures, with a spiral staircase connecting the levels in an elegant helix. Books lined every available surface, some so old I could barely touch them without specialized gloves. Someone here understood the value of preservation, even if they'd hired the cheapest restorer they could find to handle it. I'd barely seen the owner of the estate. Matthias Cardinal moved through the halls like smoke, always present, but never substantial enough to grasp. The few times I'd glimpsed him, he'd been surrounded by men in expensive suits, their conversations conducted in low tones that suggested business I didn't want to understand. The other staff avoided me with the kind of deliberate ignorance that suggested they'd been instructed not to form attachments. I ate alone in the small staff dining room, worked alone in the library, and returned to my quarters each night without exchanging more than a dozen words with another human being. It should have felt lonely. Instead, it felt safe. Loneliness was familiar territory. The alternative, the collectors, the threats, my father's hollow apologies. That was terrifying. My fingers traced the gold leaf on the spine of a 17th century manuscript, feeling the raised edges where time had worn away the softer materials beneath. This book had survived wars, plagues, revolutions. It had outlasted everyone who'd originally owned it. There was comfort in that kind of permanence. "You missed dinner." The voice came from somewhere above me, masculine and controlled with an edge that suggested he was accustomed to immediate obedience. I didn't look up, kept my attention focused on the delicate work of cleaning centuries of accumulated grime from the book's edges. "I ate earlier." The lie came easily. I'd skipped dinner to avoid the suffocating silence of the staff dining room, preferring the hunger to the isolation. "Emmanuel says you've been here for 9 hours. Footsteps descended the spiral staircase, measured and deliberate. "That seems excessive even for someone being paid by the hour." "I'm being paid by the project, actually." I set down the manuscript carefully, finally allowing myself to look up. Matthias Cardinal stood 3 steps from the bottom of the staircase, dressed in dark trousers and a white shirt with the top buttons undone, revealing the hollow of his throat. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it. Steel gray eyes assessed me with the same clinical precision I used when evaluating a book's condition, cataloging flaws, estimating worth, deciding whether restoration was possible. "You're the book restorer." Not a question. He'd known exactly who I was before descending those stairs. Nadia Veretti. I stood slowly, brushing dust from my simple black work dress. Even standing, I had to tilt my head back to meet his gaze. He was tall, broad-shouldered in a way that suggested actual physical work rather than gym vanity, and carried himself with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. "How long will the restoration take?" He descended the final steps, moving into the library proper with the possessive ease of someone who owned not just the space but everything in it. I'd prepared for this question, had spent hours calculating the scope of work required to properly restore his collection. 6 months if I work alone, 4 if you hire an assistant with the proper training. You'll work alone. Definitive, no room for negotiation. I don't want additional people in my home. His home. Not the estate, not the house. His home. The distinction felt significant, a glimpse into how he viewed this carefully controlled empire he'd built. Then 6 months. I turned back to the manuscript, assuming the conversation was over. Most employers lost interest once logistics were established. You don't eat with the other staff. Another observation delivered in that same flat tone. I prefer working through meals. The truth was simpler than that, but I'd learned early that people accepted workaholism more easily than social anxiety. Emmanuel thinks you're antisocial. He moved closer, and I caught the scent of expensive cologne mixed with something darker. Whiskey, maybe, or the kind of cigar that cost more than my monthly rent used to. Emmanuel is entitled to his opinion. I kept my voice neutral, professional. Whatever dynamic existed between Matthias Cardinal and his head of security wasn't something I wanted to navigate. He also thinks you're stealing. The words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples of implication. My hand stilled on the manuscript. I'm not. I know. He was directly behind me now, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. I have cameras throughout the estate. I've watched you work. You handle those books like they're holy relics. The cameras. Of course there were cameras. I'd been operating under the assumption of privacy, when in reality, every moment had been observed, catalogued, analyzed. The realization should have made me angry. Instead, I felt strangely relieved. He'd seen me work, which meant he understood I was good at what I did. Then why mention it? I finally turned to face him, forcing myself to meet those calculating gray eyes. Because Emmanuel will be fired tomorrow. Matter of fact, as if he were discussing the weather. He's been skimming from the household accounts. The accusation against you was his attempt to deflect attention. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt cold dread settling in my stomach. You didn't need to tell me that. No. He studied my face with that same clinical assessment. But you'll hear about it tomorrow, and I wanted you to understand that accusations in this house have consequences. The implicit threat hung between us. Don't make accusations, don't create problems, don't become a liability. I understand, Mr. Cardinal. I took a deliberate step back, putting professional distance between us. Matthias. The correction was soft, but absolute. Everyone who lives here calls me Matthias. Lives here, not works here. The distinction felt significant. Another glimpse into how he categorized the people in his world. He left without another word, ascending the spiral staircase with the same measured grace he'd used to descend. I stood alone in the library, surrounded by centuries of accumulated knowledge, and wondered what I'd just agreed to by accepting his informal address. The next morning, Emmanuel was gone. So were 3 other guards whose names I'd never learned. By afternoon, the entire security detail had been rotated out, replaced by unfamiliar faces who nodded respectfully when I passed, but never spoke. Grace, the housekeeper who'd been kind enough to show me where things were kept during my first week, found me during what should have been lunch. She was in her late 50s, with silver hair pulled into an efficient bun and eyes that had seen enough to make her dangerously perceptive. You should eat something. She set a plate on the library table nearest my workspace, ignoring my protests. You're going to make yourself sick working these hours. I'm fine. The lie was wearing thin even to my own ears. You're not. She settled into one of the ornate chairs I'd been avoiding, making it clear she wasn't leaving until I ate. And you're about to get a lot less fine if you don't start paying attention to the politics in this house. I picked up the sandwich she'd brought. Fresh bread, what looked like expensive cheese and vegetables that probably came from some exclusive provider, and forced myself to take a bite. I'm not interested in politics. I'm here to restore books. Nobody is ever just here to do their job, sweetheart. Grace's tone was gentle but firm. Especially not in a house like this. What kind of house is this? I'd been deliberately avoiding that question for 3 weeks, focusing on the work and ignoring the broader context. Grace was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant. The kind where the owner decides who stays and who goes, and the decision is always final. Emmanuel wasn't just fired, Nadia. He was erased. His apartment in the staff wing was cleared out within an hour. His references will all mysteriously dry up. In 6 months, he'll be working security at a shopping mall if he's lucky. The sandwich suddenly tasted like cardboard. Why are you telling me this? Because Matthias talked to you yesterday. She leaned forward, her expression serious. He never talks to staff. Never. The fact that he sought you out means you're on his radar, and that's either the best or worst thing that could happen to you here. I'm just restoring his books. The protest sounded weak, even to me. Keep telling yourself that. Grace stood, collecting the plate even though I'd barely eaten half the sandwich. But when things start changing, and they will, remember that you're not just a book restorer anymore. You're someone Matthias Cardinal noticed. That's a category all its own. She left me alone with my manuscripts and my growing sense of unease. The library, which had felt like a sanctuary, suddenly seemed more like a stage where I was performing for an audience I couldn't see. The cameras. I found myself hyper-aware of them now, wondering which angles captured my workspace, whether audio was included, how much of my muttered conversations with centuries-dead authors had been overheard and analyzed. I tried to focus on the work. A collection this extensive required systematic organization before restoration could even begin. I'd developed a cataloging system during my first week, photographing each volume, noting condition issues, prioritizing based on deterioration severity. It was methodical, precise work that usually brought me peace. Usually. Now I found myself wondering why someone like Matthias Cardinal, because I'd looked him up, of course, late at night on my phone in the privacy of my small room, needed this library. His business empire was vast and deliberately opaque, with holdings that ranged from legitimate real estate development to import companies that probably did exactly what you'd expect import companies owned by people like him to do. He collected books the way some people collected art or cars, as investments, as status symbols, as proof of cultural refinement. But the collection itself suggested something different. These weren't just expensive first editions chosen for their auction value. Someone had built this library with genuine knowledge, selecting volumes that tracked the evolution of human thought across centuries. Philosophy, history, rare scientific manuscripts, medieval religious texts. The collection was comprehensive and thoughtful in a way that suggested actual scholarship. Someone here understood not just the monetary value, but the intellectual legacy these books represented. I was still thinking about this 3 hours later when the dinner bell rang through the estate's intercom system. The staff dining room would be serving the evening meal, and I should probably make an appearance. Grace's warning had been clear enough. Isolation was no longer a viable strategy. The staff dining room occupied the ground floor's east wing, a surprisingly pleasant space with tall windows overlooking the gardens. When I arrived, 12 other people were already seated, engaged in quiet conversations that stopped the moment I entered. Nadia, a young woman with dark curls and a warm smile, gestured to an empty chair. I'm Constance. I manage Mr. Cardinal's schedule. You've been hiding in the library since you arrived. I slid into the offered seat, acutely aware that every eye was on me. I've been working. We've noticed, A man across the table spoke with barely concealed amusement. Matthias mentioned you've made more progress in 3 weeks than the previous restorer made in 6 months. The previous restorer. I'd wondered what happened to them, whether they'd left voluntarily or been erased the way Emmanuel had been. The previous restorer was more interested in selling volumes to private collectors than actually preserving them. Constance served herself from the dishes in the table's center. Roasted chicken, fresh vegetables, bread that still steamed. You're the first person Matthias has hired who actually seems to care about the books themselves. I accepted the plate she passed me, trying to process this information. How long did they last? 2 months. Constance's smile sharpened. Matthias discovered the theft during a random audit. The restorer was escorted off the property within an hour. We never saw them again. The implicit threat was clear. Success here meant more than just competence. It meant absolute trustworthiness, complete discretion, and the kind of loyalty that didn't question or challenge the man who controlled everything. Dinner passed in careful conversation, with the other staff members clearly assessing me, trying to determine whether I'd become a permanent fixture or a temporary problem. I answered questions vaguely, kept my observations to myself, and excused myself as soon as politely possible. The walk back to my quarters took me through the estate's main corridor, a gallery of sorts lined with artwork that ranged from classical oil paintings to contemporary pieces I couldn't begin to price. The lighting was subtle, designed to showcase the collection without overwhelming it. Avoiding people again? Matthias's voice came from a side corridor, where he stood with 2 men in expensive suits. They were reviewing what looked like architectural plans spread across a side table. Returning to my quarters, Mr. Cardinal. The formal address felt safer than the familiarity he'd offered last night. Matthias. The correction was gentle but absolute. He said something in low tones to his companions, then dismissed them with a gesture that suggested he was accustomed to being obeyed without question. They left without argument, gathering their plans and disappearing down the corridor. Matthias approached with that same measured grace I'd noticed before, closing the distance between us with calculated precision. You ate dinner with the staff. Another observation. Did nothing happen in this house without his knowledge? Grace suggested it would be wise. I kept my voice neutral, professional. Grace is usually right about these things. He stopped close enough that I could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the slight shadow of stubble along his jaw. She also thinks I'm making you uncomfortable. You're not. The lie was automatic, self-protective. You're a terrible liar, Nadia. The use of my first name felt intimate, deliberate. Your hands are shaking. I looked down, surprised to find he was right. My fingers trembled slightly, betraying the anxiety I'd been trying to hide. It's been a long day. You work too hard. He reached out slowly, giving me time to pull away, and took my hand in his. His palm was warm, calloused in unexpected places, and the touch sent electricity racing up my arm. You're going to burn yourself out at this pace. The collection is extensive. I tried to focus on the work, on anything other than the warmth of his hand holding mine. 6 months is already ambitious. Then take longer. He released my hand, but the sensation lingered. I'd rather have the work done properly than quickly. Most employers would disagree. The observation slipped out before I could stop it. I'm not most employers. Something shifted in his expression, a glimpse of the man beneath the careful control. And you're not most employees. Grace told me about your father's debts. Cold dread replaced the warmth his touch had generated. That's private. Nothing is private here. Matter of fact, without apology. I screen everyone who enters my home. Your father owes money to some very dangerous people, Nadia. The kind of people who don't accept payment plans or negotiate settlements. I wanted to run, to escape this conversation and this man who saw through every defense I'd constructed. But my feet remained rooted to the expensive carpet, my body betraying my mind's desperate need for flight. "I'm handling it." The protest sounded weak, even to me. "You're hiding." He moved closer, and I felt the wall against my back, realized he'd effectively trapped me without ever touching me again. "You took this job because it offered isolation and enough money to buy time. But time runs out eventually, and the people your father owes don't forget debts. Why do you care?" The question emerged sharp with defensive anger. "I'm just someone restoring your books. I don't know." The admission seemed to surprise him as much as it surprised me. "But I do, and that's going to complicate both of our lives considerably." He stepped back, releasing me from the invisible cage his proximity had created. "Your father's debt will be settled by morning. Consider it an advance on your salary." "I can't accept that." I pushed off the wall, trying to reclaim some dignity. "That's not professional." "Nothing about this is professional anymore." He turned to leave, then paused. Emmanuel wasn't just stealing Nadia. He was selling information about my household to competitors. The cameras caught him photographing documents in my office. His interest in you was strategic. He thought if he could recruit you, you'd have access to information worth selling. The revelation left me cold. I'd been targeted without even knowing it, marked as a potential vulnerability in whatever dangerous games these people played. "I would never," I started, but he cut me off. "I know. That's why you're still here." He met my eyes one final time. "Sleep well, Nadia. Tomorrow your life gets considerably less simple." He left me standing in that gallery corridor, surrounded by priceless art and the crushing weight of obligations I'd never agreed to accept. My father's debt, 6 months of brutal work, settled with a single decision. The collectors who'd haunted my nightmares, erased with the same casual authority he'd used to fire Emmanuel. I should have felt grateful. Instead, I felt owned. The library felt different after that night. I worked surrounded by invisible eyes, knowing each gesture was observed, analyzed, interpreted through whatever lens Matthias Cardinal used to categorize the people in his world. The books no longer provided refuge, just distraction. Grace found me 3 days later, during what should have been lunch. "You've been avoiding the staff dining room again." "I'm working." I didn't look up from the manuscript I was cleaning, a 14th century psalter with illuminated margins that required microscopic attention. "You're hiding." She set down a tray, soup, bread, tea, on a table I couldn't ignore. "And you're making Matthias nervous." That got my attention. "I make him nervous?" "He's not accustomed to people rejecting his help." Grace settled into her usual chair, making it clear this wasn't a brief visit. "You haven't thanked him for settling your father's debt. You've barely spoken to him in 3 days. The man is spiraling." Spiraling. I repeated the word like it was foreign. Matthias Cardinal doesn't spiral. He controls everything. He controls business and security and his public image. Grace's smile was knowing. He has absolutely no idea what to do with a woman who won't fall at his feet in gratitude when he solves her problems. I set down the delicate brush I'd been using, forced myself to meet Grace's perceptive gaze. "He bought my father's debt. That's not solving a problem. It's creating a different kind of obligation." "Is that what you think?" She shook her head. "Sweetheart, Matthias Cardinal could have bought your debt and used it to control you. He could have made employment here conditional on repayment. Instead, he settled it and told you to consider it in advance. Do you understand what that means? That I owe him 6 months of work, instead of owing dangerous men 6 months of fear." The distinction felt thin. "That he gave you freedom without demanding anything in return." Grace leaned forward. "Matthias doesn't do that, ever. The fact that he did it for you means something changed in him when he met you, and he's trying to figure out what." I don't want to be someone's curiosity project." The words came out harsher than intended. Too late. Grace's expression turned serious. "You became interesting the moment you handled those books like they mattered more than money. You became fascinating when you rejected his help. And yesterday, when Samuel Bishop made a comment about your legs during the security briefing, you became something else entirely." My stomach dropped. "What?" "Matthias fired him." Grace's voice was gentle but firm. "On the spot. Told him to be gone within the hour. Then he fired every male guard under 40 who worked the library wing. By dinner, the entire security detail had been rotated to men over 50, who are either married or have given Matthias no reason to doubt their professionalism." I stared at her, processing this information. Matthias had fired people. Again. Because of me. Because one man had made an inappropriate comment. He'd restructured his entire security team. That's insane. The protest felt necessary, even though my racing heart suggested a different reaction entirely. "That's possessive." Grace stood, collecting the untouched tray. "And Matthias Cardinal doesn't do possessive any more than he does generous without strings. Whatever is happening between you two, it's unprecedented, which means it's either going to be the best or worst thing that ever happened to you." She left me alone with that observation, and the growing realization that I'd somehow become important to a man I barely knew, in ways I didn't understand and couldn't control. The rest of that day passed in a haze of careful cataloging and mounting anxiety. I documented condition issues with mechanical precision, photographed deterioration patterns, noted restoration priorities. The work was meditative, methodical, safe. Until it wasn't. I heard them before I saw them. Raised voices from the corridor outside the library, rapid-fire conversation in what sounded like Italian. The words were too fast for my limited language skills, but the tone was unmistakable. Argument, accusation, threat. The library door opened. Matthias entered with another man, younger, dressed in an expensive suit that screamed old money and new problems. They were mid-argument, gesturing with the kind of aggressive familiarity that suggested family rather than business. Ridiculous, and you know it. The younger man switched to English, probably for my benefit. "You've fired 30 men in 3 days. The entire security apparatus is in chaos. Whatever point you're trying to make. The point, Ezekiel, is that I can fire whoever I want, for whatever reason I want." Matthias's voice was cold, controlled. My house, my rules, my consequences. Ezekiel. The name clicked. Ezekiel Cardinal, Matthias's younger brother, who supposedly handled the family's legitimate business interests, while Matthias managed everything else. "Your paranoia is going to cost us contracts." Ezekiel's gaze found me then, assessing and dismissing in a single glance. "Is this about the book restorer? The men are saying you've lost your mind over some girl who barely looks at you." The temperature in the room dropped. Matthias moved with startling speed, putting himself between his brother and me with deliberate precision. "Careful, Ezekiel." "Or what? You'll fire me too?" The younger man laughed, but it sounded forced. "I'm family, Matthias. You can't erase me the way you erase problems." "I can make your life considerably more difficult." Still that cold, controlled tone. "You're handling the legitimate businesses because I allow it, not because you've earned the right. Don't forget who built this empire." The brothers stared at each other with the kind of tension that suggested years of complicated history. Finally, Ezekiel looked away first, shaking his head. "You're going to regret this. Whatever obsession you've developed, it's going to destroy everything we've built." He left, slamming the library door hard enough to make the nearest bookshelf tremble. I found myself gripping the manuscript I'd been holding, my knuckles white with tension. "I apologize for that." Matthias turned to face me, and his expression had shifted from cold fury to something softer, almost uncertain. "Ezekiel doesn't understand boundaries. He's right, though. I set down the manuscript before I damaged it. You've fired 30 men because of me. That's not normal, Matthias. Normal. He moved closer, each step measured and deliberate. Nadia, nothing about any of this is normal. I've spent 15 years building a reputation for absolute control, for never letting personal feelings influence business decisions. And then you arrived with your careful hands, and your refusal to be impressed by money or power, or anything else I could offer. And suddenly I'm firing men for looking at you the wrong way. That's not healthy. The protest felt necessary even as my heart raced with something that definitely wasn't fear. Probably not. He stopped close enough that I could see the storm in his gray eyes. But neither is working 12-hour days to avoid eating meals with other people. Neither is accepting isolation as the price of safety. We're both a little broken, Nadia. The question is whether we're broken in compatible ways. I should have moved away. Should have maintained professional distance. Reminded him that I was hired to restore books, not to become entangled in whatever complicated dynamics governed his world. Instead, I heard myself say, "Your brother called this an obsession." He's not wrong. Matthias reached up slowly, giving me time to pull away, and touched my cheek with unexpected gentleness. I've watched you work for 3 weeks. Watched you treat centuries-old paper with more care than most people show living things. Watched you choose books over human connection, safety over comfort. And somewhere in that watching, I became obsessed with understanding why. Maybe there's nothing to understand. My voice emerged shakier than intended. Maybe I'm just someone who prefers dead authors to living people. Oh, or maybe you've been hurt enough times that isolation feels safer than vulnerability. His thumb traced my cheekbone with devastating precision. I understand that instinct, Nadia. I've built an empire on it. But isolation is just another kind of cage, and eventually, you'll want out. And you're offering freedom? The skepticism was automatic, protective. I'm offering a different kind of cage. His hand dropped away, and I felt the loss like physical pain. One where you're protected, valued, given space to do the work you love without constantly looking over your shoulder. But yes, it's still a cage, just a more comfortable one. Why? The question burst out before I could stop it. Why do you care what happens to me? I don't know. The admission seemed to cost him. But I haven't stopped thinking about you since the moment you looked up from that manuscript and met my eyes like you weren't afraid. Everyone is afraid of me, Nadia, except you. And that's either the most dangerous or most attractive thing I've ever encountered. He left before I could respond, leaving me alone in that vast library with racing thoughts and the lingering sensation of his thumb against my cheek. I touched the spot where his hand had been, feeling the warmth he'd left behind. Grace was right. This was unprecedented, and I had absolutely no idea whether it was the best or worst thing that had ever happened to me. The days after Matthias's confession blurred into a strange new pattern. I worked in the library as always, but now I felt his presence even when he wasn't physically there. The cameras had become something different. Not surveillance, but connection. He was watching me work, and I found myself performing for that invisible audience in ways I didn't fully understand. Small changes appeared without announcement. The uncomfortable stool I'd been using vanished, replaced by an ergonomic chair designed for long hours. A small refrigerator materialized in the corner, stocked with foods I'd mentioned liking during staff dinners I barely remembered attending. The lighting in my workspace improved, subtle adjustments that reduced eye strain during detailed restoration work. Grace noticed, of course. She noticed everything. He's courting you. She appeared during my 4th consecutive missed lunch, carrying a tray I no longer bothered refusing. In the strangest, most Matthias cardinal way possible, he's courting you. He's being considerate to an employee. I accepted the food, forcing myself to eat while examining a water-damaged binding that needed delicate intervention. Nadia, Grace's tone turned serious. Matthias doesn't do considerate. He does efficient, effective, and occasionally generous when it serves a strategic purpose. She gestured at the chair, the refrigerator, the improved lighting. This is personal. I wanted to deny it, to maintain the fiction that I was just a temporary employee restoring books in exchange for cleared debts. But the evidence was mounting in ways I couldn't ignore. Matthias had restructured his household around my presence, and pretending not to notice felt increasingly absurd. What does he want from me? The question emerged quieter than intended. I don't think he knows yet. Grace settled into the second ergonomic chair that had appeared yesterday. That's what makes this interesting. Matthias Cardinal always knows what he wants and how to get it. You're the first time I've seen him uncertain. I don't want to be someone's uncertainty project. I set down the damaged binding before frustration made me careless. I want to do my work and figure out my life without becoming collateral damage in whatever this is. Too late. Grace's smile was sympathetic. The moment he paid your father's debt, you became part of his world. The only question now is what role you'll play in it. She left me with that observation, and the uncomfortable realization that she was right. I'd been operating under the illusion of choice when the reality was far more complicated. Matthias had bought my father's debt, fired 30 men because of me, and restructured his household to accommodate my preferences. These weren't the actions of a man offering options. They were the actions of someone claiming territory. That night, I couldn't sleep. The small staff quarters that had felt safe now seemed claustrophobic, the walls closing in with each passing hour. At 2 a.m., I gave up, pulled on a sweater over my sleep clothes, and padded barefoot through the silent estate toward the library. The security detail had changed again. Now older men nodded respectfully as I passed, their expressions professionally neutral. No one questioned my middle-of-the-night wandering, which suggested Matthias had given instructions about my movements. The library was dark, except for moonlight streaming through tall windows, casting geometric shadows across the floor. I moved through the space without turning on lights, navigating by memory and ambient illumination toward the manuscript I'd been working on earlier. Couldn't sleep either. Matthias's voice came from the reading alcove near the windows, startling me enough that I actually gasped. He sat in one of the leather chairs, dressed in dark trousers and an unbuttoned white shirt, a glass of amber liquid in one hand. The moonlight made his features look carved from stone, all sharp angles and shadows. I didn't know you were here. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly aware of how little my sleep clothes covered. I'll go. Stay. Not a command, but not quite a request either. I'd appreciate the company. I should have left. Should have maintained whatever boundaries still existed between employer and employee. Instead, I found myself moving toward the alcove, settling into the chair opposite his with careful distance between us. Why can't you sleep? I asked, because the silence felt too heavy to bear. Business complications. He took a sip of his drink. Whiskey, probably, based on the color. My brother thinks I'm having a mental breakdown. Half my board agrees with him, and the other half is waiting to see if my obsession with my book restorer will create opportunities they can exploit. The casual mention of board politics and business vulnerabilities should have frightened me. Instead, it felt like trust, like he was offering glimpses of the man beneath the careful control. Are you? Having a breakdown? I pulled my knees up to my chest, wrapping my arms around them. Probably. His smile was self-deprecating. 15 years of perfect control, and I'm undone by a woman who treats books better than people. I don't treat books better than people. The protest was automatic. I just understand books. They don't lie or leave or demand things I can't give. They're safe. Nothing is safe, Nadia. He set down his glass, leaning forward with sudden intensity. Not books, not isolation, not the careful walls you've built around yourself. Eventually, something gets through. Is that what you are? Something getting through? I meant it as a challenge, but it came out sounding vulnerable. I'm the battering ram. No apology in his tone, just acknowledgement. I saw someone interesting, and I can't seem to stop myself from trying to understand why you're interesting. It's selfish and probably destructive, but it's also honest. What if I don't want to be understood? I tightened my grip on my knees. What if I came here to hide, not to be discovered? Then you chose the wrong house. He stood, moving to the windows where moonlight painted him in silver and shadow. Everything in my world eventually gets discovered, cataloged, and integrated. It's not personal. It's just how I operate. That sounds lonely. The observation slipped out before I could stop it. He turned to face me, and something in his expression cracked open, revealing pain I hadn't expected. It is. Profoundly, achingly lonely. Which is why I'm standing here at 2 a.m, confessing vulnerabilities to someone I barely know, hoping she'll offer something other than pity or fear. I stood slowly, crossing the space between us before my rational mind could interfere. I'm not afraid of you, Matthias. I'm afraid of what you represent. Obligation, entanglement, the kind of complications I've spent years avoiding. But you, specifically, you're just a man who collects books and doesn't know how to handle feelings. His laugh was startled and genuine. Just a man. No one has called me that in years. Maybe they should. I stopped close enough to see the fine lines around his eyes, the exhaustion he hid during daylight hours. Maybe you've spent so long being Matthias Cardinal, empire builder and feared businessman, that you've forgotten how to just be human. And you're going to teach me? He reached up, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear with devastating gentleness. I'm going to survive you. I held his gaze steadily. However this ends, and it will end, eventually, I'm going to survive it with my dignity intact. I'd expect nothing less. His hand lingered against my cheek. You're the strongest person I've met in years, Nadia. You just hide it behind books and careful isolation. Survival strategy. My voice wavered slightly. If people don't see you, they can't hurt you. But they also can't know you. His thumb traced my cheekbone. And being unknown is its own kind of death. We stood there in moonlight and unspoken possibility until I finally stepped back, breaking the moment before it could become something I wasn't ready for. I should sleep. I moved toward the door, needing distance. We both should. Nadia. He stopped me with my name. The complications you're afraid of? They're already here. Running won't change that. I left without responding. But his words followed me back to my quarters and into dreams that felt less like rest and more like premonition. The next morning brought a new complication in the form of Constance Cross standing outside the library, her expression professionally pleasant in a way that immediately set my nerves on edge. Nadia, perfect timing. She fell into step beside me as I entered the library. Matthias asked me to coordinate your schedule. He thinks you're working too hard. Matthias doesn't get to coordinate my schedule. I set down my work bag, already defensive. I manage my own time. Of course. Her smile never wavered. But he's concerned about burnout. 6 months is ambitious for a collection this size, and he'd rather extend the timeline than risk your health. The reasonable words carried an undercurrent I couldn't quite identify. Constance had been polite but distant during staff dinners, never going out of her way to engage beyond basic courtesy. This sudden attention felt strategic. Did Matthias specifically ask you to coordinate my schedule, or is this your interpretation of a general concern? I met her eyes directly, refusing to be intimidated. Something flickered in her expression. Respect, maybe, or reassessment. Direct instruction. He wants you taking regular breaks, eating proper meals, maintaining reasonable work hours. And he sent his schedule manager instead of telling me himself because I pulled out the manuscript I'd been working on, running through my mental checklist of necessary supplies. Because he didn't want you to feel pressured. Constance's professional mask slipped slightly. Look, I've worked for Matthias for 5 years. I've seen him date, conduct affairs, even maintain a few long-term arrangements. But I've never seen him restructure his household around someone. Whatever is happening between you two, it's unprecedented. Nothing is happening. The denial was automatic, even as my racing pulse suggested otherwise. Then why did he fire Samuel Bishop for a comment about your appearance? Why did he rotate out 30 guards? Why is he drinking alone in the library at 2 a.m. instead of sleeping? She crossed her arms. Matthias Cardinal doesn't lose control. But he's losing it over you, and that makes you dangerous to everyone in this house. The accusation hung between us, sharp and clear. I was a threat, simply by existing, a disruption to carefully maintained order. I didn't ask for any of this. I kept my voice level despite rising anger. I came here to restore books, that's all. But you stayed after he paid your father's debt. Constance's expression hardened. You could have left, found another position, maintained independence. Instead, you accepted his advance and continued working in his home. What does that make you if not complicit? She was right, and the realization stung. I'd accepted Matthias's interference, allowed him to settle debts and restructure security, and reorganize my workspace. I'd participated in this growing entanglement, even while claiming to want independence. What do you want, Constance? I set down the manuscript, giving her my full attention. If you're here to warn me away from Matthias, save your breath. I'm not pursuing him. I want you to understand what you're dealing with. Her voice dropped lower, more urgent. Matthias Cardinal doesn't do half measures. If he's decided you're important, he'll reorganize his entire world to keep you. But the moment you become a liability, the moment you threaten his control or his business or his carefully constructed empire, he'll erase you as efficiently as he erased Emmanuel. That's who he is. Why are you telling me this? I searched her face for the real motivation behind this warning. Because I like you. The admission seemed to surprise her as much as it surprised me. You're genuine in a house full of people performing roles. You care about those books like they matter, and you haven't tried to leverage Matthias's interest into personal gain. That's rare enough to be worth protecting. By warning me away? I shook my head. Constance, I appreciate the concern, but I can handle myself. Can you? She moved toward the door, pausing at the threshold. Because from where I stand, you're a book restorer who accidentally stumbled into a power dynamic you don't understand, with a man who's accustomed to owning everything he touches. Handle that, if you can. But don't pretend you're not in over your head. She left, and I stood alone in the library, surrounded by centuries of accumulated knowledge that suddenly felt inadequate for navigating the present. I tried to focus on work, but Constance's words kept echoing through my thoughts. Matthias didn't do half measures. He erased people who became liabilities. I was in over my head, all true, all terrifying. And yet, I pulled out my phone, typing a message before I could second-guess the impulse. I need to talk to you, not about books. His response came within seconds. My office, 20 minutes. Matthias's office occupied the estate's west wing, a space I'd glimpsed only once during my initial tour. It was as controlled as the rest of his world. Dark wood, minimal decoration, technology integrated so seamlessly it was nearly invisible. He stood behind his desk reviewing documents when I entered, but his attention shifted to me immediately. Close the door. I obeyed, suddenly uncertain what I'd meant to say. Constance came to see me this morning. I know. She reported the conversation. He gestured to one of the chairs facing his desk. Sit. She reported... I remained standing, anger flaring. You sent her to warn me away, then had her report back. I sent her to coordinate your schedule. The warning was her own initiative. He moved around the desk, closing the distance between us. Though not unwelcome. You should understand what you're getting into. What am I getting into? I held my ground even as he moved closer. You've paid my debts, fired half your staff, and apparently drink alone in libraries at ungodly hours. But you've never actually told me what you want from me. I don't know. The admission came more easily this time. I want you safe. I want you here. I want to understand why I can't stop thinking about you. Beyond that, he shook his head. Beyond that, I'm improvising for the first time in 15 years. That's not good enough. I forced steel into my voice. I need clarity, Matthias. Are you pursuing me romantically? Professionally? Is this some kind of elaborate power game I don't understand? All of the above. He reached up, cupping my face with both hands. I'm pursuing you because I'm fascinated by you. I'm keeping you here because having you close feels necessary in ways I can't explain. And yes, there's probably a power dynamic at play because that's how I understand relationships. But none of it is a game, Nadia. Games have rules and predictable outcomes. This is chaos barely contained. I should have pulled away, should have maintained boundaries, reminded him that I was his employee, insisted on professional distance. Instead, I leaned into his touch, allowing myself one moment of vulnerability. I don't know how to do this. The confession cost me. I don't know how to be close to someone without losing myself. Then we'll learn together. He pressed his forehead against mine, the gesture unexpectedly tender. I'm not asking you to lose yourself, Nadia. I'm asking you to let me see who you actually are beneath the isolation. What if you don't like what you find? The fear emerged quiet and honest. Impossible. His certainty was absolute. I've watched you work for a month. I've seen you gentle with centuries-old paper, fierce with people who underestimate you, brilliant when you think no one is watching. Whatever else you're hiding, it won't change what I've already seen. A knock interrupted the moment. Matthias pulled back, his expression shifting to cold professionalism. Enter. Grace opened the door, her face grave. Sir, there's a situation. Emmanuel Temple is at the gate requesting entrance. He says it's urgent. Matthias's entire demeanor changed, warmth replaced by the calculating businessman everyone feared. Emmanuel was fired and barred from the property. He knows. He's saying he has information about threats to the estate. Specifically, Grace's gaze flicked to me briefly. Specifically about Miss Veretti. My stomach dropped. Emmanuel, the guard who'd been fired for stealing and had accused me of theft as deflection, was back with information about threats. Nothing about that was coincidental. Increased security around the library wing. Matthias's voice was flat, controlled. Nadia stays in this office until I determine what he knows. I'm not hiding in your office while you deal with problems I might have caused. I moved toward the door, but he caught my wrist. You didn't cause anything. His grip was gentle, but firm. Emmanuel made choices that got him fired. Whatever he's doing now is retaliation, not consequence of your actions. But he's using me to get to you. The realization settled cold and heavy. Constance was right. I'm a liability. You're not. He pulled me closer, his other hand coming up to grip my shoulder. You're someone I care about, which makes you valuable, not vulnerable. There's a difference. Grace cleared her throat politely. Sir, Emmanuel is becoming agitated. Security says he's making threats about going to the media. Matthias released me, his expression hardening. Tell security to detain him for trespassing. I'll deal with him personally. He turned back to me. Stay here. Grace will remain with you. Don't leave this office until I return. Matthias, I started, but he was already moving toward the door. This isn't a request, Nadia. He paused at the threshold, his gaze meeting mine. I protect what's mine. You're going to have to accept that. He left before I could argue, leaving me alone with Grace and the uncomfortable realization that somewhere in the last month, I'd become something worth protecting to a man accustomed to protecting everything. Grace settled into the chair behind Matthias's desk, her expression unreadable. You should know. Emmanuel didn't leave quietly when he was fired. He made threats, said Matthias would regret crossing him. This was inevitable. What kind of threats? I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold. The kind that suggest he'd been planning betrayal long before he was caught stealing. Grace's voice was gentle but firm. Emmanuel Temple came from a rival family, Nadia. His employment here was probably always strategic. Matthias discovered that when reviewing security footage, Emmanuel wasn't just photographing documents. He was mapping the estate, cataloging vulnerabilities, building intelligence. The implications crashed through me. I'd been a target not just for recruitment, but as potential leverage, a vulnerability Emmanuel could exploit. If Matthias hadn't caught him when he did, I need to leave. The decision crystallized with sudden clarity. This is too dangerous. I came here to restore books, not to become caught in whatever wars you people are fighting. Too late. Grace's expression was sympathetic but unyielding. The moment Matthias paid your father's debt, you became part of his world. Emmanuel knows that. Whatever he's planning, leaving now would just make you more vulnerable, not less. I sank into the chair opposite the desk, feeling trapped. Every choice I'd made since arriving at this estate had narrowed my options. Until now, I was caught in a web I hadn't seen being woven around me. We sat in tense silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes. When Matthias finally returned, his expression was carved from ice. It's handled. He moved to the bar cart in the corner, pouring himself whiskey. Emmanuel won't be a problem anymore. What does handled mean? I needed to know, needed to understand what price had been paid for my safety. It means he's been detained and will face consequences for trespassing, making threats, and attempting to extort me with fabricated information. Matthias downed the whiskey in one swallow. It also means his family will be warned that further interference will result in business complications they can't afford. You threatened his family. The realization made me queasy. I protected mine. He set down the glass with controlled precision. That's what I do, Nadia. I identify threats and neutralize them before they can cause damage. Emmanuel chose to make himself a threat. He faces the consequences. And the information he claimed to have about me. I stood, needing to move. Was that real or fabricated? Fabricated. Matthias moved toward me with predatory grace. He was trying to suggest you were working with competitors, selling information about my collection. It was weak and easily disproven, but he was desperate enough to try. Relief washed through me, followed immediately by anger. So I've been dragged into your world, made a target, and now I'm dependent on your protection from threats I never asked to face. Does that summarize our situation? Yes. No apology, just acknowledgement. And I'm not sorry for it. You should be. I held his gaze despite the intensity there. You should be sorry for paying debts I didn't ask you to settle, for firing people because of your jealousy, for reorganizing my life to fit your preferences. You should be sorry for all of it. But I'm not. He stopped close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. Because if I hadn't done those things, you'd still be vulnerable to your father's collectors, still isolated in your work, still pretending that safety and loneliness are the same thing. I disrupted that, and I won't apologize for it. Even if I didn't want to be disrupted, the question emerged quiet, but fierce. Especially then. His hand came up to cup my cheek. You're too brilliant, too strong, too valuable to waste your life hiding from human connection. Someone needed to drag you into the light. I'm just arrogant enough to think I should be that someone. I should have been angry, should have rejected his presumption, his control, his absolute certainty that he knew what I needed better than I did. Instead, I found myself leaning into his touch, acknowledging a truth I'd been avoiding. I don't know how to trust this. The confession cost me. Every instinct says run, protect myself, maintain distance. But every day I stay makes running harder. Then stop running. He pulled me closer, his arms coming around me with unexpected gentleness. Stay. Work on the books you love. Let me handle the complications. And maybe eventually, let yourself believe that being seen isn't the same as being vulnerable. I let myself sink into his embrace, just for a moment. Let myself feel protected instead of trapped, chosen instead of obligated. It wouldn't last. Nothing this intense ever did. But for now, it felt like breathing after drowning. Matthias? I pulled back enough to see his face. Yes? Your brother was right. You're completely obsessed. And it's possibly the most terrifying and exhilarating thing that's ever happened to me. His smile was genuine and unguarded. I'll take that as encouragement. 3 weeks after Emmanuel's failed extortion attempt, I woke to find an envelope slipped under my door. Heavy cream paper, my name written in unfamiliar script across the front. Inside, a single card with an address in the city and a time, 2 p.m. today. No signature, no explanation, but the quality of the paper and the presumption of my obedience suggested only one person. I found Grace in the kitchen during breakfast preparation. Did Matthias leave instructions about my schedule today? He left the estate early this morning. She set down the coffee she'd been brewing. Some business situation that required his personal attention. Why? I showed her the card. Her expression shifted from curious to concerned. That's not his handwriting. Cold dread settled in my stomach. Then who? Constance. Probably. Or someone acting on instructions we weren't told about. Grace pulled out her phone, typing rapidly. I'm messaging Matthias now. You're not going anywhere until we know this is legitimate. But I was already moving toward my quarters, some instinct demanding I prepare. If this was a trap, walking into it unprepared seemed foolish. If it was legitimate but unexpected, understanding Matthias's reaction might tell me more about our dynamic than weeks of careful conversation. I dressed in simple black pants and a gray sweater, professional, unmemorable, pulled my hair back into a practical braid, checked that my phone was charged and the emergency number Matthias had programmed into it was easily accessible. Grace was waiting in the corridor when I emerged. Matthias responded. He didn't send that card. He wants you to remain at the estate until he returns. When will that be? I kept walking toward the main entrance. Tonight at earliest. Nadia, where are you going? She followed, her tone shifting to alarm, to find out who thinks they can summon me with a mysterious card. I pulled out my phone, photographing the address. Someone knows enough about this household to slip things under my door without being caught on camera. That's worth investigating. That's dangerous. Grace caught my arm. Whoever sent this could be connected to Emmanuel, to rival families, to any number of threats we don't understand. Which is exactly why I need to understand what this is. I gently removed her hand. Grace, I've spent a month being protected, monitored, kept safe inside these walls. But I'm not a prisoner, and I won't act like one. If someone wants to meet me, I'll meet them. In public, in daylight, with my phone tracking my location. Matthias will lose his mind. But Grace was already pulling out her own phone. Fine, but I'm sending your location to his security team, and if you're not back here by 4 p.m., they're coming to get you. Fair enough. I headed for the garage, where a car service Matthias had arranged for my use waited. The driver, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and capable hands, nodded when I gave her the address. That's in the financial district, Miss Veretti. About 40 minutes with traffic. Then we should leave now. I settled into the back seat, watching the estate disappear behind high walls and careful landscaping. Part of me wondered if I'd be allowed to return, if this was the choice that would finally make me a liability Matthias couldn't afford. The rest of me was too curious to care. The address led to an upscale coffee shop on the ground floor of a steel and glass tower. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out onto a busy street, and every table was visible from outside. Whoever had chosen this location wanted witnesses, wanted public safety. I entered at 1:58 p.m., scanning the interior. The woman sitting at the corner table was elegant, probably in her late 50s, with silver hair pulled into a sophisticated knot and clothing that whispered old money rather than shouting it. She saw me, gestured to the empty chair across from her. I approached cautiously, keeping my phone visible on the table, making sure the driver could see me through the window. Nadia Veretti. Not a question. She had my coffee waiting, an oat milk latte, which was precisely what I'd have ordered. That level of knowledge was either impressive or terrifying. Thank you for coming. I didn't have much choice. I settled into the offered chair, not touching the coffee. You slipped a card under my door at a highly secure estate, during hours when I should have been sleeping. That takes resources and information most people don't have. It does. Her smile was cool and assessing. I'm Ezekiel Cardinal's wife, Lisette. Matthias has never mentioned me, I assume. The revelation landed like a punch. Ezekiel, Matthias's brother who'd warned about obsession destroying everything they'd built. He hasn't. That's unsurprising. Matthias prefers to control information flow. Lisette sipped her own coffee, completely at ease. But I'm not here to discuss my brother-in-law's communication style. I'm here to discuss you. What about me? I kept my hands visible, my posture open, non-threatening. You've become a problem. Her tone remained pleasant, conversational. Not intentionally, I'm sure. But Matthias's obsession with you is causing instability in the family business. 30 fired guards, restructured security protocols, missed meetings, distracted decision-making. These aren't minor inconveniences. They're existential threats to an organization that requires absolute focus. I didn't ask for his attention. The defense felt weak even as I spoke it. No, but you accepted his interference. Lisette set down her cup. He paid your father's debts. You stayed. He reorganized your workspace. You continued working. He fires men who look at you incorrectly. You allow it. Every acceptance makes you more complicit, more entangled. She was right. And the words stung precisely because I'd been telling myself the same thing for weeks. What do you want from me? Leave. Simple, direct. Take a generous settlement. I'm authorized to offer you $100,000 and disappear. Start your own restoration business somewhere far from here. Use Matthias's obsession to build a better life, then vanish before it destroys both of you. $100,000. More money than I'd ever imagined having. Enough to establish independence, to build the life I'd always wanted. All I had to do was walk away from books I loved restoring, and a man who'd somehow become essential. And if I refuse? I met her eyes steadily. Then you become responsible for what happens next. Lisette's expression hardened. Matthias is powerful, but he's not invincible. His obsession with you makes him vulnerable. And there are people, both inside and outside the family, who will exploit that vulnerability. When they do, when the violence comes, you'll have to live with knowing you could have prevented it. By running away, the accusation emerged sharp. By making a strategic choice, she pulled out a business card, sliding it across the table. This account is accessible with a code I'll provide if you agree. The money will be transferred within 24 hours. You'll sign documents agreeing never to contact Matthias again, never to discuss your time at the estate, never to leverage your connection to him. And if I tell Matthias about this conversation? I picked up the card, examining it. He'll be furious with me, grateful to you for your honesty, and even more obsessed than before. Lisette stood, preparing to leave. Which is exactly the opposite of what I'm trying to prevent. Think about it, Nadia. You're young, talented, capable of building an extraordinary life. But not if you're caught in the crossfire of wars you don't understand. She left before I could respond, disappearing into the lunchtime crowd with practiced ease. I sat alone at that table, staring at the business card, my untouched latte, the life I could have for the price of walking away. My phone buzzed. Matthias. Grace told me about the card. Where are you? I typed back. Coffee shop. Meeting with Lisette Cardinal. We need to talk. His response was immediate. Stay there. I'm 20 minutes away. He arrived in 15, moving through the coffee shop with the kind of controlled urgency that made other patrons instinctively move aside. His gaze found mine, and something in his expression cracked when he saw I was unharmed. Lisette. He slid into the chair she'd vacated, his hands clenching into fists on the table. What did she offer you? $100,000 to disappear from your life. I pushed the business card across the table. She says your obsession with me is making you vulnerable, that I'm responsible for violence that's coming. She's not wrong. His admission was quiet and devastated. About the obsession, anyway. The violence was always coming, Nadia. It's the nature of my world. But she's right that you've become a target because of your connection to me. And the money? I needed to know if he'd fight to keep me or accept that walking away was smarter. Take it. The words seemed to cost him. If you want independence, real freedom to build your own life, take the money and go. I'll honor the non-contact agreement. You'll be safe from me and everything I represent. I stared at him, searching for signs of manipulation, of strategic reverse psychology. But his expression held only raw honesty, and something that looked like grief. What if I don't want to go? The question emerged quieter than intended. His eyes met mine with devastating intensity. Then you need to understand what you're choosing. My world isn't safe or simple or anything resembling normal. There will be threats like Emmanuel, family politics like Lisette, competitors who'll see you as leverage. Staying means accepting that you're not just a book restorer anymore. You're someone I care about, which makes you both protected and vulnerable. And if I'm willing to accept that? My heart raced, blood rushing in my ears. Then I need you to tell me why. He reached across the table, taking my hand. Because I can't be the only one invested in this, Nadia. I can't care this much while you're still deciding whether to run. It's not fair to either of us. I looked down at our joined hands, at the contrast between his calloused palms and my ink-stained fingers. We were absurdly mismatched. A dangerous man and a woman who preferred books to people. An empire builder and someone who just wanted to preserve beautiful things. But somewhere in the last 6 weeks, I'd stopped being just a book restorer. I'd started imagining a life where isolation wasn't the highest virtue, where being seen didn't automatically mean being hurt. I stayed after you paid my father's debts. The confession emerged slow and honest. Not because I was trapped, but because part of me wanted to see what would happen. You were intense and controlling and completely overwhelming, but you also looked at me like I was worth seeing, like I mattered beyond my usefulness. You do matter. His grip tightened. You matter in ways I don't have words for yet. Then help me understand this. I turned my hand in his, lacing our fingers together. Not the obsession or the protection or the way you've reorganized your life around me. Help me understand what you actually want from this relationship. I want you here. Simple, direct. Not as an employee, not as some kept woman, not as leverage or vulnerability. I want you in my home because you want to be there. I want to watch you work on those books because seeing you happy makes me happy in ways I've forgotten were possible. I want to know that when threats come, and they will, you trust me to handle them without you needing to run. That's a lot of wanting. I tried for lightness, but my voice wavered. It is. He raised my hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to my knuckles. And I'm fully aware of how selfish and demanding it is. But I'm done pretending to be moderate about this. You asked for honesty. That's what honest looks like on me. I thought about Lisette's offer, about the life I could build with $100,000 and complete independence. Thought about my small apartment before this, my isolated existence, the careful walls I'd built to protect myself from ever being hurt again. Then I thought about late-night conversations in the library, about how Matthias's face softened when he watched me work, about feeling protected instead of smothered. I'm keeping the card. I pulled Lisette's business information closer, tucking it into my pocket. Not because I plan to use it, but because I need to know I have options, that I'm choosing to stay, not being forced. Fair enough. His relief was palpable. What else do you need? Clarity about what staying means. I met his eyes directly. Are we dating? In a relationship? What are we telling people? We're together. He said it with absolute certainty. However you want to define that is fine, but you're not just my employee or my friend or some complicated situation I can't categorize. You're the woman I'm pursuing with every resource I have, and I'd like you to stop pretending you're not interested in being pursued. Heat flooded my face. I never said I wasn't interested. You didn't have to. Your body language has been screaming, "Stay away," for 6 weeks. His smile was knowing. But your eyes tell a different story when you think I'm not looking. Arrogant. But I was smiling too, feeling something loosen in my chest. Observant. He stood, pulling me up with him. Come on, I'm taking you somewhere. Where? I let him guide me toward the exit, where his driver waited with a car I recognized. Somewhere I should have taken you weeks ago. He helped me into the back seat, settling beside me with casual intimacy. If we're doing this, if you're actually staying, then you need to see more of my world than just the estate. He took me to a building I'd never noticed before, tucked away in a neighborhood that had probably been industrial once, but was now transitioning to something gentler. The exterior was unremarkable, but when he unlocked the door, I stepped into a space that made my breath catch. Books. Thousands of them, maybe tens of thousands, filling custom shelving that reached toward high ceilings. Not the ancient manuscripts from his estate collection, but books in every condition, every language, every possible category. What is this place? I moved forward slowly, running my fingers along pristine spines and damaged covers alike. My private collection. He remained by the door, watching me explore. The estate library is for show, for impressing business associates and maintaining appearances. This is where I keep the books I actually read. I pulled out a battered paperback, science fiction from the 70s, pages yellowed and spine creased from multiple readings. Next to it sat a first edition philosophical text, and beside that, a graphic novel I'd loved as a teenager. You read all of these? The collection was eclectic, in a way that suggested genuine love rather than calculated acquisition. Most of them. He moved closer, standing behind me. I started collecting when I was 12, after my father died. Books were safer than people, more predictable. You could revisit them, and they'd be exactly the same. No hidden agendas or shifting loyalties. The admission created sudden context for so much of his behavior. He understood isolation, understood using books as fortress walls. We'd built our defenses the same way. Why show me this? I turned to face him, the battered paperback still in my hands. Because Lisette's right that you don't fully understand my world. His expression was open, vulnerable in a way I'd never seen. But neither does she. She sees the violence and the business and the control. But she doesn't see this. Doesn't know that the man everyone fears is someone who rereads Terry Pratchett novels when he's stressed and collects first editions of feminist theory and has been trying to find a specific children's book from his childhood for 15 years. What book? The question emerged soft, intimate. Doesn't matter. But his eyes said it mattered enormously. Point is, I'm not just the dangerous man everyone warns you about. I'm also someone who understands why you chose books over people. And I'm asking you to choose both. To keep the books you love and the person I'm trying to become for you. I set down the paperback carefully, stepping into his space. What if you can't become that person? What if the violence and business and control are too fundamental to change? Then you'll know you tried. He pulled me closer, his arms coming around me with gentle certainty. And I'll know I gave you every reason to stay before you finally left. That's depressingly realistic. But I was leaning into his embrace, letting myself feel safe. I'm trying honesty instead of seduction. His lips brushed my temple. Seems to be working better anyway. We stood there in his secret library, surrounded by evidence that he was more complex than his reputation suggested. And I let myself admit what I'd been denying for weeks. I wanted to stay, wanted to know him, wanted to see if the man behind the empire was worth the complications of entering his world. Okay. The decision felt right, inevitable. I'm staying. Not because I'm trapped or obligated, but because I want to see what this becomes. His relief was physical, his body relaxing against mine. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I pulled back enough to see his face. I have conditions. Name them. Absolute willingness to negotiate. First, I keep my own quarters at the estate. If we're doing this, I need space that's mine. I held up a finger. Second, you don't fire anyone else because of your jealousy without discussing it with me first. Your employees deserve better than being erased because a man can't control his feelings. Fair. He was smiling now, genuinely amused. Third, I want access to this library. Full access, whenever I want, no questions asked. I looked around the space with barely concealed longing. This collection deserves proper cataloging and preservation, and I'm the best person to do it. You can have a key. He pulled one from his pocket, pressing it into my palm. I had it made last week, hoping you'd stay long enough to use it. Presumptuous. But I closed my fingers around the key, feeling its weight like a promise. Hopeful. He kissed me then, slow and deliberate and full of unspoken promises. When we finally broke apart, both breathing harder, his forehead rested against mine. Anything else? Yes. I traced the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. You have to let me choose you, too. This can't just be about your obsession and my capitulation. If we're doing this, we're equals, even if your world is more complicated than mine. Equals. He repeated the word like he was tasting it, testing whether it fit. I can work with that. We stayed in his library until sunset, painted the high windows gold and orange. And for the first time since arriving at the Cardinal estate, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The first real threat came 3 weeks after I'd officially moved my things into what Matthias had started calling our home, rather than the estate. I was in his private library, my library now too, cataloging the philosophy section when Grace appeared with an expression that made my stomach drop. "There's a woman at the front gate." Her voice was carefully controlled. "She's demanding to see Matthias, saying she has information about threats to the family. Security is concerned because she knew about you." My hands stilled on the book I'd been examining. Knew what about me? "Your name, your role here, specific details about your schedule." Grace moved closer, lowering her voice. "Nadia, she described what you wore to the city 3 days ago. Someone has been watching you." The cold dread I'd been successfully ignoring for weeks crashed through me. This was what Lisette had warned about. The moment when Matthias's obsession made me vulnerable to people who wanted to exploit it. Where is Matthias? I set down the book with careful precision, buying time to think. In a meeting with his board. They're discussing expansion into new territories, and he can't be interrupted unless it's an actual emergency. Grace pulled out her phone. "But I can message him, tell him to come home." "No." The decision felt right, even as fear clawed at my chest. "Let's find out what this woman actually wants before we disrupt his meeting. Maybe it's nothing. Or maybe it's exactly the kind of something you should be running from." Grace's expression was torn between respect and concern. "Nadia, you don't have to be brave about this. Let Matthias handle it. Matthias handles everything." I moved toward the door, surprising myself with my certainty. But I'm not a damsel waiting to be rescued anymore. I'm someone who chose this life knowing it came with complications. Time to actually deal with them. Grace followed me to the security office, where monitors showed every angle of the estate's perimeter. The woman at the gate was young, maybe my age, dressed in expensive clothes that suggested access to real money. Her dark hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail, and even through the grainy video feed, her beauty was undeniable. Who is she? I studied her body language, confident, not desperate. Whatever she wanted, she believed she had leverage. Victoria Marchetti. The head of security, a man named Ezekiel Bishop, pulled up a file on his computer. Daughter of Marco Marchetti, who runs one of the competing families. She and Matthias were. He paused, clearly uncomfortable. Were what? I kept my voice level despite the jealousy stirring in my gut. Involved, about 2 years ago. Briefly. It ended badly when Matthias discovered she'd been sent by her father to gather intelligence. Ezekiel closed the file. She hasn't been seen near the property since. Her appearance now is concerning. Let her in. The words emerged before I'd fully thought them through. I want to talk to her. Miss Veretti, I don't think... Ezekiel started, but I cut him off. She came here asking for Matthias but specifically mentioned me. That suggests I'm the real target, not him. So let's find out what she wants from me directly, in a controlled environment where you're monitoring everything. Grace grabbed my arm. This is a terrible idea. Probably. I met her eyes steadily. But I'm done being protected from everything. Victoria Marchetti wants to see me? Fine. Let's see what kind of game she's playing. 20 minutes later, I sat in one of the estate's smaller sitting rooms, elegant but not ostentatious, with security positioned discreetly nearby. Victoria entered with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting exactly what she wanted. Nadia Veretti. She settled into the chair across from me with practiced grace. The book restorer who caught Matthias Cardinal's attention. I've been curious about you. And now you've satisfied your curiosity. I kept my tone neutral. What do you actually want? To warn you. Her smile was sharp. Matthias has a pattern, you know. He becomes obsessed with women who seem unimpressed by his power. He pursues them relentlessly, reorganizes his world around them, makes them feel irreplaceable. And then, once he's won, once they've finally fallen for him, he loses interest. The chase was always more important than the catch. The words landed like carefully aimed arrows, each one designed to hit vulnerabilities I'd been trying to ignore. Is that what happened to you? Spectacularly. She crossed her legs, completely at ease. I fell completely, embarrassingly in love with him. Thought we were building something real. Then he discovered I'd been sent to gather intelligence, which I had been, initially, but had stopped the moment my feelings changed. And he cut me off without a conversation. Just had me escorted from the property and told never to return. Maybe he cut you off because you betrayed his trust. I held her gaze. Not because he lost interest. Maybe. Her expression shifted, became more calculating. Or maybe the betrayal was the excuse he needed to end something that was becoming too real. Have you noticed that about him? How he controls everything except his own feelings? How he'll reorganize the world to keep you close, but won't actually admit to needing you? Every word hit closer to concerns I'd been burying. Matthias was intense and possessive, but he'd never actually said he loved me. Never used language that suggested permanence beyond his immediate obsession. Why are you really here, Victoria? I leaned forward. Because I don't think you drove across the city to warn me out of altruistic concern. Smart. Her smile returned. My father wants to negotiate with Matthias about territorial disputes, but Matthias won't meet with him because of our history. I'm hoping you can convince him. And if I don't, I already knew the answer. Then my father moves forward with plans that will make Matthias's life considerably more complicated. She pulled out her phone, showing me a photo. That's you, 3 days ago, at a bookstore in the city. Alone, without security, very vulnerable. The threat was clear. She'd been watching me, documenting my movements, preparing to use me as leverage. Exactly what Lisette had warned about. You're threatening me to force a meeting. I kept my voice steady despite the fear racing through me. That's bold. That's business. Victoria put away her phone. Talk to Matthias. Convince him to meet with my father. Or continue being followed every time you leave this property without protection. Your choice. She stood, preparing to leave. I should have let her go. Should have told Matthias immediately and let him handle the situation. Instead, I heard myself say, what if there was a third option? She paused, curiosity clear in her expression. I'm listening. What if I arrange a meeting between your father and Matthias in exchange for you backing off the surveillance and threats? I stood, moving closer. You get what you want without further antagonizing a man who's proven he holds grudges. I get to walk around the city without being followed. Everyone wins. Why would you do that? Her assessment of me shifted. You could just tell Matthias about this conversation. He'd escalate security, probably make my life miserable. Why offer to help instead? Because I'm tired of being protected from everything. The truth emerged clear and certain. If I'm going to be in Matthias's world, I need to actually be in it. Making decisions, solving problems, being useful beyond just restoring books. This seems like a good place to start. Victoria studied me for a long moment. You're either very brave or very stupid. Probably both. I pulled out my phone. Give me your number. I'll call you when the meeting is arranged. She did, and after she left, I stood alone in that sitting room feeling equal parts terrified and exhilarated. I'd just negotiated with a rival family, made promises I wasn't sure I could keep, and completely bypassed Matthias's protection. He was going to lose his mind. He returned from his meeting 4 hours later, just as the sun was setting. I waited in his office, having decided that facing his reaction in his space might soften the blow. Grace told me about Victoria. He entered already tense, his gaze finding me immediately. "Are you all right? Did she threaten you?" "Yes and yes." I stood from behind his desk, where I'd been reviewing his calendar. "She's been following me when I leave the estate, documenting my movements, preparing to use me as leverage for a meeting between you and her father." His expression went from concerned to furious in seconds. "I'll have her detained for stalking and threats. Marco Marchetti will learn what happens when—" I arranged a meeting. The words stopped his building tirade. "Between you and Marco. Tuesday at noon, neutral location. In exchange, Victoria stops the surveillance and backs off the threats." The silence that followed was absolute. Matthias stared at me like I'd suddenly started speaking a language he didn't understand. "You did what?" "I negotiated a solution instead of letting you escalate into violence." I moved around the desk, closing the distance between us. "Victoria wanted a meeting. You wouldn't give her one because of your history. She was using me to force your hand. So I offered a third option that gets everyone what they want. By putting yourself in the middle of a territorial dispute you don't understand." His voice was dangerously quiet. "Nadia, these aren't business negotiations. These are families who've been killing each other for generations. You can't just broker peace because it seems logical." But I did. I held my ground. "And you're going to honor the meeting I arranged because walking it back now would make me look weak, which makes you look weak by extension." He moved so fast I didn't have time to react, backing me against the desk with controlled intensity. Don't use strategic logic to justify putting yourself at risk. You're not a negotiator, you're not trained for this, and you have no idea what kind of target you just painted on yourself." "I'm a target anyway." The frustration I'd been suppressing for weeks finally erupted. "Victoria knew where I was 3 days ago, Matthias. She had photos, timing, everything. Your protection isn't working if rivals can track my movements that easily. So I chose to be proactive instead of reactive. I chose to actually participate in your world, instead of being some fragile thing you keep locked away." "You're not." He stopped himself, running a hand through his hair. "You're not fragile. I've never thought that. But you're untrained, Nadia. You don't know how to read these situations, how to identify real threats versus strategic misdirection. Then teach me." I reached up, cupping his face with both hands. "If I'm staying, if we're doing this, then train me. Show me how to navigate your world instead of just protecting me from it. Make me an asset instead of a liability." He searched my face, conflict clear in his expression. Finally, he pulled my hands away from his face, but didn't release them. "You want training?" "I want to be useful." The admission cost me. "I want to be someone you trust to handle herself, not someone you have to constantly rescue." "Fine." His decision was abrupt and definitive. "But the training starts now, and the first lesson is understanding consequences. You arranged a meeting without knowing if Marco Marchetti actually wants peace or if this is a setup. You put yourself in Victoria's sights by admitting you have influence over my decisions. And you did all of this without consulting anyone who actually understands these dynamics. So I made mistakes. I pulled my hands free, crossing my arms defensively. I'll learn from them." "No." He moved closer, eliminating the space between us. "Mistakes in my world don't come with gentle corrections and room to improve. They come with violence and retaliation, and people you care about getting hurt. You want to be useful? Start by understanding that every choice you make now has consequences for more people than just yourself." The words hit harder than I expected. In my determination to prove I could handle his world, I'd put not just myself, but potentially Matthias and everyone at the estate at risk. The realization was sobering. "I'm sorry." The apology emerged quiet and genuine. You're right. I acted impulsively without thinking through the implications. But you did successfully negotiate a meeting I've been avoiding for months. His expression softened slightly, which suggests you have instincts for this, even if your execution needs work. So you'll honor the meeting? Hope flickered in my chest. I'll honor it. He pulled me closer, his arms coming around me. But you're coming with me, and you're going to watch how actual negotiations work. Consider it the first part of your training. Relief washed through me. I'd expected fury, possibly rejection. Instead, he was adapting, incorporating my reckless choice into something strategic. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. His voice carried warning. Tuesday's meeting could still be a disaster. Marco Marchetti isn't someone who forgets grudges, and my history with Victoria complicates everything. But we'll face it together, and maybe, your impulsive negotiation will turn out better than it has any right to. We stood there in his office, holding each other as sunset painted the windows orange and gold. And I realized that somewhere in the last few months, I'd stopped being just a woman restoring books, and had become someone willing to fight for her place in a dangerous man's complicated world. The consequences of that transformation were still unfolding. But for better or worse, I was committed now. Tuesday arrived with unseasonable rain, as if the weather understood the tension crackling through every hour leading to noon. I dressed carefully. Dark pants, a silk blouse in deep gray, low heels that wouldn't slow me down if running became necessary. Matthias had been explicit about the dress code. Professional but not flashy, expensive enough to command respect, but not so expensive as to suggest vulnerability worth exploiting. You look perfect. He appeared in my doorway, my quarters that I'd insisted on keeping despite spending most nights in his, dressed in a charcoal suit that made his gray eyes look like storm clouds. But I need you to understand something before we leave. I turned from the mirror, meeting his gaze. I'm listening. Marco Marchetti is not a businessman who occasionally deals in gray areas. Matthias moved closer, his expression grave. He's a man who built his empire on violence and intimidation, who sees negotiation as weakness unless it's backed by absolute force. He'll be looking for vulnerabilities today, and you're mine. Then I'll be careful not to show weakness. I reached for my bag, but he caught my wrist. Nadia, I'm serious. If this goes wrong, if he decides the meeting is an opportunity rather than actual negotiation, things could get dangerous very quickly. I need you to promise me that if I tell you to leave, you leave immediately without argument. The intensity in his voice made my pulse jump. I promise. And if something happens to me? He stopped himself, jaw tightening. Nothing is going to happen to you. I pulled him close, pressing my forehead against his. We're going to a neutral location with both our security and his. This is a conversation, not a war. It's always a war. But he was holding me now, his arms tight around my waist. It just sometimes looks like conversation. The restaurant Marco had chosen was upscale Italian, the kind of place where politicians and business leaders brokered deals over wine that cost more than most people's monthly rent. We arrived 10 minutes early, Matthias's insistence that punctuality communicated strength, and were escorted to a private room on the second floor. Marco Marchetti was already there, flanked by two men who were obviously security despite their expensive suits. He stood as we entered, his expression carefully neutral as he assessed first Matthias, then me. Matthias Cardinal. He extended his hand. It's been a long time. Marco. Matthias shook briefly, professionally. Thank you for agreeing to meet. I should thank your associate. Marco's gaze settled on me with uncomfortable intensity. Victoria tells me you were quite persuasive about the benefits of actual conversation. I suggested it made more sense than ongoing territorial disputes. I kept my voice level, professional. Conflict is expensive for everyone involved. practical. Something that might have been approval flickered in his expression. Matthias, you finally found someone with sense. That's refreshing. We all settled around the table, Matthias to my left, Marco across from us, his security positioned strategically near the exits. The first course arrived without anyone ordering, suggesting Marco had pre-selected the entire meal. Another power play, demonstrating control over even small details. Let's be direct. Marco cut into his appetizer with precise movements. I asked for this meeting because the current territorial arrangement no longer serves my family's interests. You control 3 districts that border ours, but your presence there is minimal. I'm proposing a trade. 2 of your districts for access to your port operations. Matthias's expression remained neutral, but I felt tension radiate through his body. The port operations are non-negotiable. Everything is negotiable if the price is right. Marco's smile was cold. Or we can continue our current situation, where we're both spending resources on maintaining borders that neither of us actually wants to defend. Your choice. I watched the exchange, beginning to understand the dynamics. Marco was offering something Matthias didn't value, 2 districts he barely controlled, in exchange for something vital, port access that was worth millions. It was a terrible deal disguised as reasonable compromise. What if there was a third option? I heard myself say, then felt Matthias's hand find my knee under the table in warning. Too late now. Marco's attention shifted to me fully. I'm listening. Matthias doesn't want to give up port operations, and you're right that the border districts are resource drains for both families. I pulled out my phone, showing a map I'd been studying for days since arranging this meeting. But there's a 4th district, currently controlled by the Benedetti family, that borders both your territories. What if you worked together to acquire it, then divided it equally? Silence. Both men stared at me like I'd suggested something revolutionary or insane. Maybe both. The Benedetti district. Marco leaned back, considering. That would require coordinated action, shared intelligence, trust we don't have. It would also eliminate a mutual threat. I kept going, momentum overriding caution. The Benedettis have been expanding aggressively, pushing into both your territories. Taking them down together prevents either of you from being weakened by solo action. Matthias's hand tightened on my knee, but he didn't stop me. Marco was watching with calculation clear in his expression. This wasn't why I came here. But Marco was already pulling out his own phone, bringing up the same district map. Though I admit the logic is sound, Benedetti operations have been a problem, which neither of us can solve alone without exposing our own vulnerabilities. Matthias spoke for the first time since my interruption. But together, it's viable. The conversation shifted then, both men discussing logistics, resource allocation, timeline for coordinated action. I stayed silent, letting them work through details, but I caught the occasional glance from Marco, assessing, recalculating, understanding that I wasn't just Matthias's weakness, but potentially an asset. The meeting lasted 3 hours. By the end, they'd agreed to a provisional partnership for taking down Benedetti operations, with details to be negotiated by their respective legal teams. Not a permanent alliance, but a temporary cooperation that served both their interests. As we prepared to leave, Marco caught my arm gently. Victoria was wrong about you. She thought you were another pretty distraction. But you're something more dangerous. You're someone who actually understands how this world works. I'm learning. I extracted my arm carefully, not making a scene but making the boundary clear. Learn faster. His smile held warning. Because you just put yourself on everyone's radar. The families will all want to know who Matthias Cardinal's strategist is, whether you can be bought or intimidated. You've made yourself relevant, which means you've made yourself a target. In the car afterward, Matthias said nothing for the first 10 minutes. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. That was either brilliant or reckless. I'm still deciding which. Can it be both? I stared out the window at rain-slicked streets. You undermined my initial negotiating position. But there was no heat in his words. I went in planning to refuse his proposal and threaten escalation if he continued border disputes. You pivoted to collaboration instead, because escalation would have cost resources you can't afford right now. I turned to face him. Your own board is questioning your focus. Adding a border war to that instability would have been disastrous. How do you know about board concerns? His eyes narrowed. I read the minutes from your last meeting. They're on your desk. At his expression, I shrugged. You said you wanted me to understand your world. Understanding requires information. He stared at me for a long moment, then laughed. Genuine, surprised, delighted. You're reading confidential board minutes to prepare for negotiations you weren't supposed to be part of. I'm being strategic, I defended. You wanted me trained. This is me training myself. And by diving into the deep end and hoping you can swim. But he pulled me closer, pressing a kiss to my temple. Grace was right. You're either the best or worst thing that ever happened to me. Why not both? I repeated, settling against his side. We rode in comfortable silence back to the estate. But as we pulled through the gates, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. The message was simple. Well played today, but the game is just beginning. V. Victoria. Watching, assessing, planning her next move. I showed the message to Matthias. She's not going to let this go. His voice was grim. You humiliated her by succeeding where she failed, and people like Victoria don't forgive that. Then I'll deal with her when she makes her move. I deleted the message. I'm done running from complications, Matthias. I'm in your world now. That means accepting that some people will see me as a threat. And if the threat becomes violent? He caught my chin, forcing me to meet his eyes. If Victoria or Marco or someone else decides the best way to hurt me is through you, then you teach me to protect myself. I held his gaze steadily. Like you promised. Real training, real preparation. I'm not asking to be coddled anymore. He studied my face, searching for doubt or fear. When he found neither, something shifted in his expression. Pride, maybe, or recognition. Okay, training starts tomorrow. And Nadia, it won't be gentle. I didn't expect it to be. I kissed him softly. I expect it to make me strong enough to stand beside you instead of behind you. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every shadow seemed to hold threat. Every sound suggested danger I wasn't trained to identify. At 2 a.m., I gave up and went to Matthias's private library, seeking comfort in familiar books and quiet spaces. I was cataloging Victorian first editions when I heard the door open. Matthias entered, dressed in sleep clothes, his hair disheveled from restless sleep. Couldn't rest either. He settled into the chair beside my workspace. Too much adrenaline. I set down the book I'd been examining. Today was. Terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure? He supplied. Exactly. I laughed shakily. I keep replaying the meeting, wondering if I made things better or worse. Better. His certainty was absolute. Marco would have rejected my initial position, and we'd have escalated into border conflicts that would have cost millions. Your solution gave us both a win while eliminating a mutual threat. It was strategic brilliance, even if it was also impulsive. So I'm learning. I turned to face him fully. You're learning that you have instincts for this. He reached out, tucking hair behind my ear, which is both reassuring and terrifying. Because now I can't pretend you're just someone I'm protecting. You're becoming someone I work with, someone who makes strategic decisions that affect both our lives. Is that a problem? I held my breath, waiting for his answer. It should be. He pulled me into his lap, wrapping his arms around me. Every logical part of me says you should stay in this library, away from negotiations and threats and the violence of my world. But watching you today, watching you think 3 steps ahead and find solutions I hadn't considered, I realized something. What? I settled against his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong. That I don't just want to protect you anymore. His voice was quiet, vulnerable. I want to build something with you. An empire that's ours, not just mine. A life where you're not someone I shelter, but someone I trust with everything. The admission made my throat tight. That's a lot of trust to place in someone who's been in your world for 4 months. 4 months where you've proven yourself repeatedly. He tightened his arms around me. You chose to stay when you could have taken Lisette's money. You negotiated with Victoria when you could have let me handle it. You found a strategic solution today when experienced negotiators would have escalated. You're not just surviving my world, Nadia. You're beginning to thrive in it. I wanted to believe him. Wanted to think I could actually build a life here, beyond just restoring books and being the woman Matthias Cardinal was obsessed with. What if I fail? What if the next crisis I try to handle ends in disaster? Then we'll handle the disaster together. Simple, certain. That's what partnership means, sharing the wins and the losses. We sat there in the quiet library, holding each other as rain continued outside. And I let myself believe, just for a moment, that maybe I could actually do this. Maybe I could be both the woman who loved books and the woman who navigated dangerous men's complicated worlds. The training would begin tomorrow. The threats would continue. But for tonight, I was exactly where I wanted to be. In Matthias Cardinal's arms, in a library full of stories, planning a future that was terrifying and beautiful in equal measure. The training was brutal. Matthias hadn't been exaggerating when he'd said it wouldn't be gentle. For 2 months, I spent mornings in the library restoring books and afternoons learning to read micro-expressions, identify threats, understand territorial politics, and, most surprisingly, basic self-defense from a woman named Rachel Bishop, who taught me that small size could be an advantage if you knew how to use leverage. Stop thinking. Rachel twisted my arm behind my back, demonstrating a hold. Your brain is excellent for strategy, terrible for physical confrontation. When someone grabs you, your body needs to react before conscious thought. I practiced the release she'd shown me, finally executing it correctly on the 5th attempt. Rachel nodded approval. Better. Again. By the time evening came, I was exhausted but buzzing with new knowledge. Matthias would find me in the library, and we'd review what I'd learned. Not just the physical training, but the strategic lessons from his world. He taught me to read contracts, spot manipulation tactics, understand the subtle hierarchies that governed interactions between families. Marco texted me today. I showed him my phone during one of these evening sessions. He wants my opinion on the Benedetti acquisition timeline. Matthias's eyebrows rose. He's texting you directly? Is that a problem? I worried I'd violated some protocol I didn't understand. No, but he looked amused. It's unusual. Marco doesn't consult with anyone outside his immediate family. The fact that he's asking your opinion means he's beginning to see you as a player in your own right, not just my associate. Is that good or bad? I set down the book I'd been restoring. Both. He pulled me into his lap, a position we'd fallen into naturally over recent weeks. Good because it means you're gaining credibility. Bad because it means more people will see you as either an asset to cultivate or a threat to eliminate. Victoria already sees me as a threat. I'd been receiving increasingly aggressive messages from her, each one making it clear she wasn't done with me yet. Which is why you need to be prepared. He kissed my temple. Rachel says you're picking up the self-defense work quickly. Rachel says I compensate for size disadvantage with strategic thinking. I repeated her words. Apparently, I'm too analytical for my own good in physical confrontations. You're analytical in everything. But his tone was affectionate. It's one of the things I love about you. The word love hung between us. He'd never said it directly before. Always implied, always circled around, but never explicitly stated. Now it sat in the space between us, demanding acknowledgement. You love me. I turned in his lap to face him fully. Yes. No hesitation. Absolute certainty. I've been in love with you since you looked up from that first manuscript and treated me like I was just another person interrupting your work. I've just been waiting for the right moment to say it. And this is the right moment? I gestured at the library around us, at the reality of our complicated situation. When I'm learning to fight because your world is dangerous, this is the perfect moment. He cupped my face with both hands. Because you're not running anymore. You're staying, fighting, building something with me. That's when the words matter most. When they're backed by actions proving they're true. I kissed him then, pouring months of unspoken feeling into the contact. When we finally broke apart, I whispered against his lips. I love you too, even though you're controlling and intense and occasionally impossible, especially because I'm those things. His smile was genuine, unguarded. You like that I challenge you. I like that you see me. The admission felt vulnerable, not just as someone to protect, but as someone capable of standing beside you. We stayed in the library until midnight, talking about the future we were building. The Benedetti acquisition was moving forward. Marco and Matthias working together with surprising efficiency. My role had evolved from book restorer to strategic consultant, though I still spent most days in the library doing the work I loved. It felt sustainable, this balance between the life I'd wanted and the world I'd entered. It felt like home. And then everything changed. It was a Wednesday afternoon, 3 weeks later. I was alone in the library, examining a 16th century manuscript, when my phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? I answered cautiously. Nadia Veretti. The voice was male, unfamiliar, cold. You have something that belongs to the Benedetti family. My blood went cold. I don't know what you're talking about. The district your boyfriend and Marco Marchetti are currently trying to steal. It belongs to us, and we don't negotiate with thieves. Sound of movement then. You have 24 hours to convince Matthias Cardinal to back off our territory. Otherwise, people you care about start getting hurt. The line went dead. I sat frozen for 5 seconds, processing. Then training kicked in. I called Matthias immediately, relayed the conversation word for word, activated the security protocols he'd taught me. He was home in 10 minutes, the entire estate lockdown in place. Ezekiel Bishop and his team swept every room. Grace was brought to the secure wing, and Matthias stood before me in the library, his expression carved from stone. This is what I was afraid of. His voice was controlled fury. They're targeting you because they know you matter to me. Then we respond strategically. I forced my voice to remain steady. We don't back off Benedetti territory. That shows weakness. But we increase security, make it clear that threats against me will be met with escalation they can't afford. Or you leave. He moved closer, gripping my shoulders. You take Grace and Rachel. Go somewhere safe until this is resolved. Let me handle the Benedettis. No, the word was absolute. I'm not running, Matthias. You taught me to be strategic, to understand your world. Running now would undermine everything we've built. It would make me look weak, which makes you look weak. I'd rather look weak than lose you. raw honesty in his voice. And I'd rather stand beside you than hide while you fight my battles. I covered his hands with mine. We face this together. That was always the deal. He pulled me into a fierce embrace, his body trembling slightly with suppressed emotion. If something happens to you because of my world, it won't, I interrupted. Because you've trained me. Because we have security. Because we're going to be smart about this. The next 24 hours were tense. Matthias contacted Marco, who confirmed he'd received similar threats. They agreed to accelerate the Benedetti acquisition, moving up the timeline from months to weeks. If the Benedettis wanted war, they'd get coordinated action that would crush their operations before they could retaliate. I stayed in the secure wing, continuing my work, but surrounded by additional security. Rachel doubled my training sessions, and Matthias barely left my side, his protective instincts in overdrive. You're hovering, I pointed out on the second day. I'm being strategic. But his smile acknowledged the truth. You're the most valuable thing in my world, Nadia. Protecting you isn't hovering. It's priority one. I can protect myself now. I demonstrated a hold Rachel had taught me, taking him off balance with surprising ease. He laughed, surprised and delighted. You're getting dangerous. Learning from the best. I released him, settling back into his arms. But seriously, Matthias, we can't live in lockdown forever. At some point, we have to call their bluff or respond in kind. Marco and I are planning a response. His voice dropped lower. By the end of this week, Benedetti operations will be dismantled. Their territory will be absorbed, and anyone who threatened you will understand what happens when they make that mistake. The cold certainty in his voice should have frightened me. Instead, it felt like safety, knowing he would do whatever necessary to protect what we'd built together. The Benedetti response came 3 days later, not with violence, but with capitulation. They agreed to sell their territory at a significant loss, accepted new boundaries that favored both Matthias and Marco, and issued formal apologies for the threats against me. They folded. Matthias showed me the signed agreements, his expression satisfied. Complete surrender. Because you and Marco presented a united front they couldn't match. I reviewed the documents, noting the details. This is a significant win. More than that. He pulled me close. It's proof that you were right. Working together was always more effective than competing. Your strategic insight made this possible. Over the following weeks, life settled into a new normal. I continued working in the library, but now I also sat in on business meetings, offered strategic opinions, and was consulted on territorial decisions. The families began to understand that I wasn't just Matthias Cardinal's girlfriend. I was someone with her own mind, her own influence. Victoria Marchetti reached out one final time, her message conciliatory. You won. I underestimated you. That won't happen again. I showed it to Matthias, who smiled grimly. She's acknowledging you as an equal. That's as close to respect as Victoria gets. 6 months after the Benedetti crisis, Matthias proposed. Not with grand romantic gesture, but with simple honesty on a quiet evening in our library. Marry me. He said it while I was cataloging philosophy texts, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I looked up from the book I'd been examining. That's not a question? No. He moved closer, taking my hands. It's a statement of intent. I'm going to spend the rest of my life with you. The question is whether you want to make it official. Official, I repeated, testing the word. Married. Partners in every sense. Building an empire together. Not just occupying the same space. He knelt then, pulling out a ring I recognized immediately. A vintage piece from his collection, Art Deco design with a single perfect stone. Nadia Veretti, will you marry me? I looked at the ring, at the man kneeling before me, at the library that had become our shared sanctuary. And I thought about the journey from isolated book restorer to strategic partner, from running away to standing firm, from protecting myself through solitude to building something extraordinary with someone equally complicated. Yes, the word emerged clear and certain. On one condition. Name it. Absolute willingness to negotiate. When we have children, and eventually we will, you teach them that books and business are equally valuable. That strength comes from knowledge as much as power. His smile was radiant. Deal. He slid the ring onto my finger, then pulled me into a kiss that tasted like promises and possibilities. When we broke apart, I was laughing and crying simultaneously. I can't believe I'm marrying a mafia boss. The words emerged through happy tears. You're not marrying a mafia boss. He stood, pulling me up with him. You're marrying a man who collects books and loves you, and happens to control half the city. The context is just details. We were married 3 months later in the estate's garden, surrounded by the unlikely mixture of rare book dealers and dangerous men, by Grace and Rachel, and the people who'd become family over the year I'd been here. Marco Marchetti attended with surprising grace, bringing a first edition as a gift, and nodding to me with something close to respect. Even Victoria came, sitting in the back, her expression unreadable, but non-threatening. Peace, or at least détente. As Matthias and I exchanged vows I'd written myself, promising partnership and challenge and love that grew stronger through complication, I caught sight of the library visible through the estate windows. My sanctuary, our shared space, the place where isolation had transformed into connection. I love you, Matthias whispered as we were pronounced married, his forehead resting against mine. My brilliant, strategic, occasionally impossible wife. I love you too. I kissed him softly. My controlling, intense, absolutely perfect husband. The reception lasted until dawn, and as the sun rose over the Cardinal estate, my home now, fully and completely, I stood in Matthias's arms and marveled at the journey. From a woman running from collectors and debt, to someone restoring books in isolation, to a partner standing beside one of the city's most dangerous men. From being invisible, to being seen, to being essential. It wasn't the life I'd planned. It was better, more complicated, more challenging, more thoroughly, completely real. And as Matthias spun me around the dance floor, both of us laughing with joy that had nothing to do with strategy and everything to do with love, I knew I'd made exactly the right choice. I'd stopped running. I'd started fighting. And I'd built an empire of books and love and strategic brilliance with a man who'd taught me that being seen wasn't the same as being vulnerable. It was the beginning of being free.